They call you the godfather of AI. So what would you be saying to people about their career prospects in a world of superintelligence?
Trained to be a plumber.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to become a plumber.
Geoffrey Hinton is the Nobel Prize-winning pioneer whose groundbreaking work has shaped AI
and the future of humanity.
Why do they call you the godfather of AI?
Because there weren't many people who believed that we could model AI on the brain so that it learned to do complicated things, like recognize objects and images or even do reasoning. And I pushed that approach for 50 years. And then Google acquired that technology. And I worked there for 10 years on something that's now used all the time in AI.
And then you left?
Yeah.
Why?
So that I could talk freely at a conference.
What did you want to talk about freely?
How dangerous AI could be. I realized that these things will one day get smarter than us, and we've never had to deal with that. And if you want to know what life's like when you're not the apex intelligence, ask a chicken. So there's risks that come from people misusing AI, and then there's risks from AI getting super smart and deciding it doesn't need us.
Is that a real risk?
Yes, it is, but they're not going to stop it because it's too good for too many things.
What about regulations?
They have some, but they're not designed to deal with most of the threats. Like the European regulations have a clause that say none of these apply to military uses of AI.
Really?
Yeah, it's crazy.
One of your students left OpenAI.
Yeah, he was probably the most important person behind the development of the early versions of ChatGPT. And I think he left because he had safety concerns. We should recognize that this stuff is an existential threat. And we have to face the possibility that unless we do something soon, we're near the end.
So let's do the risks and what we end up doing in such a world. Geoffrey Hinton. They call you the godfather of AI.
Yes, they do.
Why do they call you that?
There weren't that many people who believed that we could make neural networks work, artificial neural networks. So for a long time in AI, from the 1950s onwards, there were kind of two ideas about how to do AI. One idea was that sort of core of human intelligence was reasoning. And to do reasoning, you needed to use some form of logic. And so AI had to be based around logic. And in your head, you must have something like symbolic expressions that you manipulated with rules. And that's how intelligence worked. And things like learning or reasoning by analogy, they'd all come later once we've figured out how basic reasoning works. There was a different approach, which is to say, let's model AI on the brain, because obviously the brain makes us intelligent. So simulate a network of brain cells on a computer and try and figure out how you would learn strengths of connections between brain cells so that it learned to do complicated things, like recognize objects and images or recognize speech or even do reasoning. I pushed that approach for like 50 years. Because so few people believed in it, there weren't many good universities that had groups that did that. So if you did that, the best young students who believed in that came and worked with you. So I was very fortunate in getting a whole lot of really good students.
Some of which have gone on to create and play an instrumental role in creating platforms like OpenAI.
Yes, so Ilya Sutskever would be a nice example, a whole bunch of them.
Why did you believe that modeling it off the brain was a more effective approach?
It wasn't just me believed it. Early on, von Neumann believed it and Turing believed it. And if either of those had lived, I think AI would have had a very different history. But they both died young.
You think AI would have been here sooner?
I think the neural net approach would have been accepted much sooner if either of them had lived.
In this season of your life, what mission are you on?
My main mission now is to warn people how dangerous AI could be.
Did you know that when you became the godfather of AI?
No, not really. I was quite slow to understand some of the risks. Some of the risks were always very obvious, like people would use AI to make autonomous lethal weapons. That is, things that go around deciding by themselves who to kill. Other risks, like the idea that they would one day get smarter than us and maybe would become irrelevant, I was slow to recognize that. Other people recognized it 20 years ago. I only recognized it a few years ago that that was a real risk that might be coming quite soon.
How could you not have foreseen that if with everything you know here about cracking the ability for these computers to learn similar to how humans learn and just introducing any rate of improvement?
It's a very good question. How could you not have seen that? But remember, neural networks 20, 30 years ago were very primitive in what they could do. They were nowhere near as good as humans at things like vision and language and speech recognition. The idea that you have to now worry about it getting smarter than people, that seems silly then.
When did that change?
It changed for the general population when ChatGPT came out. It changed for me when I realized that the kinds of digital intelligences we're making have something that makes them far superior to the kind of biological intelligence we have. If I want to share information with you, so I go off and I learn something, and I'd like to tell you what I learned. So I produce some sentences. This is a rather simplistic model, but roughly right. Your brain is trying to figure out, how can I change the strengths of connections between neurons so I might have put that word next? And so you'll do a lot of learning when a very surprising word comes, and not much learning when it's a very obvious word. If I say fish and chips, you don't do much learning when I say chips. But if I say fish and cucumber, you do a lot more learning. You wonder, why did I say cucumber? So that's roughly what's going on in your brain.
I'm predicting what's coming next.
That's how we think it's working. Nobody really knows for sure how the brain works. And nobody knows how it gets the information about whether you should increase the strength of a connection or decrease the strength of a connection. That's the crucial thing. But what we do know now from AI is that if you could get information about whether to increase or decrease the connection strength so as to do better at whatever tasks you're trying to do, then we could learn incredible things, because that's what we're doing now with artificial neural nets. It's just we don't know for real brains how they get that signal about whether to increase or decrease.
As we sit here today, what are the big concerns you have around safety of AI? If we were to list the top couple that are really front of mind and that we should be thinking about.
Can I have more than a couple?
Go ahead. I'll write them all down and we'll go through them.
Okay, first of all, I want to make a distinction between two completely different kinds of risk. There's risks that come from people misusing AI.
Yeah.
And that's most of the risks and all of the short-term risks. And then there's risks that come from AI getting super smart and deciding it doesn't need us.
Is that a real risk?
And I talk mainly about that second risk because lots of people say, is that a real risk? Mm-hmm. And yes, it is. Now, we don't know how much of a risk it is. We've never been in that situation before. We've never had to deal with things smarter than us. So really the thing about that existential threat is that we have no idea how to deal with it. We have no idea what it's going to look like. And anybody who tells you they know just what's going to happen and how to deal with it, they're talking nonsense. So we don't know how to estimate the probabilities it'll replace us. Some people say it's like less than 1%. My friend Yann Lecan, who was a postdoc with me, thinks, no. We're always going to be, we build these things, we're always going to be in control. We'll build them to be obedient. And other people, like Yudkowsky, say, no, these things are going to wipe us out for sure. If anybody builds it, it's going to wipe us all out. And he's confident of that. I think both of those positions are extreme. It's very hard to estimate the probabilities in between.
If you had to bet on who was right out of your two friends?
I simply don't know. So if I had to bet, I'd say the probabilities in between, and I don't know where to estimate it in between. I often say 10 to 20% chance they'll wipe us out. But that's just gut, based on the idea that we're still making them, and we're pretty ingenious. And the hope is that if enough smart people do enough research with enough resources, we'll figure out a way to build them so they'll never want to harm us.
Sometimes I think if we talk about that second path, sometimes I think about nuclear bombs and the invention of the atomic bomb and how it compares. Like, how is this different? Because the atomic bomb came along and I imagine a lot of people at that time thought our days are numbered.
Yes, I was there. We did.
Yeah. But we're still here.
We're still here, yes. So the atomic bomb was really only good for one thing, and it was very obvious how it worked. Even if you hadn't had the pictures of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it was obvious that it was a very big bomb that was very dangerous. With AI, it's good for many, many things. It's going to be magnificent in healthcare and education, and more or less any industry that needs to use its data is going to be able to use it better with AI. So we're not going to stop the development. You know, people say, well, why don't we just stop it now? We're not going to stop it because it's too good for too many things. Also, we're not going to stop it because it's good for battle robots, and none of the countries that sell weapons are going to want to stop it. Like the European regulations, they have some regulations about AI, and it's good they have some regulations, but they're not designed to deal with most of the threats. And in particular, the European regulations have a clause in them that say none of these regulations apply to military uses of AI. So governments are willing to regulate companies and people, but they're not willing to regulate themselves.
It seems pretty crazy to me that I go back and forward, but if Europe has a regulation, but the rest of the world doesn't,
it puts them at a competitive disadvantage.
Yeah.
So
and we're seeing this already. I don't think people realize that when OpenAI release a new model or a new piece of software in America, they can't release it to Europe yet because of regulations here. So Sam Altman tweeted saying, our new AI agent thing is available to everybody, but it can't come to Europe yet because there's regulations.
Yes.
And what does that do? That gives us a productivity disadvantage? Right.
What we need is, I mean, at this point in history, when we're about to produce things more intelligent than ourselves, what we really need is a kind of world government that works, run by intelligent, thoughtful people. And that's not what we got.
So, free-for-all.
Well, what we've got is sort of, we've got capitalism, which is done very nicely by us. It's produced lots of goods and services for us. But these big companies, they're legally required to try and maximize profits. And that's not what you want from the people developing this stuff.
So let's do the risks then. You talked about there's human risks and then there's...
So I've distinguished these two kinds of risk.
Yep.
Let's talk about all the risks from bad human actors using AI.